Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon, and welcome to the Post 30, the wizard behind the curtain. This is our final instalment in our pernicious PhD Supervisor series. We were all so much younger when this series started, but thank you so much for being my companion through what has been quite sad and tragic and difficult literature. But this is our final stop. And this is a burgeoning problem for our universities, and indeed a burgeoning problem for our doctoral degrees. The wizards are the supervisors behind the curtain. They are the pretenders. They're invested in image, in power, in masking their lack of intellectual capacity. So what happens is students and colleagues around them become invested in the image and believe the image. But when it's necessary for these wizards to actually do it, to actually ensure students can get to examination and pass, wow, that is where they fail. They cannot do it. So today we're going to start, as always, with a story of a wizard. Then we're going to probe the taxonomy of a wizard and provide some strategies to enable your movement through it. Great. So The Wizard of Oz had a happy ending. Now, most wizards who supervise PhD students, that situation does not have a happy ending because the students never finish their PhD. Of all the different models we've talked about, the wizard is the one where the students are tricked. They do not get to examination. So the supervisor behind the curtain has all the power, but this power ignores the fact that the students are paying the penalty for maintaining this curtain over their intellectual and professional lives. So let me tell you the story of a wizard and how this curtain is constructed and how the curtain is perpetuated at the cost of students. So a woman had reached a position of seniority in a discipline where women are a minority of students and indeed a minority of academics, and she was promoted, and it's pretty unclear why she was ever promoted, but she gained some teaching success on the basis of, I would argue, ripping off her tutors and her junior colleagues, their innovations. And her research career, shall we say, let's be kind, was minimal or indeed patchy. And she had fulfilled the freeloading postdoc role in almost all the articles of her career. So fourth author of 10, sixth author of 12, fourth author of 25. So her career in doctoral education was even more disastrous. She'd never actually completed a PhD student. Certainly she'd acted as the role of principal supervisor or co-supervisor, but didn't possess the ability or the work ethic to get students to that finishing line to examination. Now, in one case, a student was enrolled for just under 7 years when I sort of became involved in this pretty weird situation. The entire panel, can I say, was dysfunctional. None of them had the ability or indeed the work ethic to get a student through drafting to examination. So by the time I read the thesis, it was an absolute mess. It was a shambles. It was 150,000 words of rambling prose. What's the argument? What's the spine? What's the SOC? The significant original contribution to knowledge. It was a mess. And of course, the student was so over time that basically that particular institution had counted her out. She's not going to finish. So I started working with the student. I started to exfoliate the argument, develop a thesis statement, and work out which chapters could actually perform a spine of an argument. And I did this as the associate supervisor because the student wanted to give the wizard another chance, and so she asked the wizard for feedback, gave her 2 weeks to offer any feedback. She didn't reply to that email, so I ended up the principal supervisor. and the wizard ended up the co-supervisor. Now, unbelievably, within 3 months, I was able to get this student submitted, and amazingly, she received from examiners 2 Bs, that is, 2 minor corrections. That's terrific. Great result. And as expected, the wizard claimed this supervision as her own. But things got very, very serious, colleagues, when conversations emerged about publications that were coming from this thesis. Now, the student and I sat down and we created a publication plan of what we believed were about 13 articles from this thesis. Now, I know it goes without saying, but I will say it. I obviously was claiming no authorship on any of these articles. I was the PhD supervisor, and part of the role of a supervisor is to enable a student to publish. This is the right thing to do, even, and indeed I would argue particularly, when we're not claiming authorship on articles. But from this research plan, the wizard supervisor started to send absolutely bonkers emails confirming their right to have authorship over all of these 13 articles. The email traffic was absolutely horrendous, and I gently helped the student use a research code of conduct, use authorship strategies from her particular institution to show that there were probably only 2 articles at a push where this particular wizard could be a co-author. But the rubbish emails just continued, where the wizard confirmed what a great researcher she was, and how she could drive this research, and how she was a research leader. Okay, so I let all this rubbish go on for a couple of days. Maybe that was a mistake, but I let it go because I tend to not intervene or get nasty if I can avoid it. And finally, after a truly bonkers email from this wizard, I wrote a reply. Short reply, clear reply, concise reply. And in that reply, I stated, here is the National Code of Conduct. Here is the authorship policy nationally and in your institution. Here is your Google Scholar profile for the entirety of your career. You are in a high cite discipline, and you've only just skimmed 1,000 citations on all those co-authored articles. Okay, let's now go into the Google Scholar profile and look at what you've done on those articles. You have only been the first author once in your entire career, and you've spent the rest of your career as a freeloading postdoc. And yes, I did use that phrase because I'm naughty. I then stated, okay, let's look at your research career. We cannot see one example in any of these articles of research leadership where you had an idea and you saw it to completion. Now, it's rare for me, very rare, in fact, this is the only time I've done it, it's rare for me to write an email like this. But the student was being bullied, and I was doing a lot of work on bullying at the time, and all the research literature about bullying said bystanders have to intervene to change the situation. And so I was a bystander and I spoke the words. And it was particularly important because the scale of differentiation between what the wizard was actually spruiking or spinning and the actual facts of their career was so incredibly disparate. So what happens is the wizard bullies, and the wizard pretends that the illusion is real, and they use this curtain to mask their mediocrity and sometimes incompetence. But of course, we live in times of metrics, lots and lots of metrics, and it's very easy to show the research activity of a scholar or the lack thereof. It's very easy to show the research expectations of a discipline or a lack thereof, and it's very easy to show if an academic has lived their lives feeding off the scholarship of others. Needless to say, when I wrote that email and called out the behaviour, the wizard went a bit bonkers in an email. How dare you? How dare you? How dare you review my public Google Scholar profile? How dare you read my articles and assess authorship? But the interesting thing is, after that sort of "how dare you" email arrived, there was silence from that point on. So this is the story of a wizard, the supervisor behind the curtain, lacking competence, lacking integrity, and lacking expertise. So let's now work out what's going on here. And we're going to bring together three literatures: popular literature studies, Baudrillard's simulation, and influencer studies, a new field I'm reading at the moment. And let's bring these three together to try and work out why this is happening now. Now, The Wizard of Oz was a book written by L. Frank Baum, and it became a 1939 film with Frank Morgan playing the legendary wizard. And if you might remember, his thunderous voice frightened Dorothy, the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, and the Cowardly Lion. But it was Toto, Dorothy's little tiny dog, who pulled back that green curtain and showed that the wizard was actually a random bloke with some interesting controls. He was not a wizard, he was not a god, he was just a mediocre bloke with delusions of grandeur. So what is significant is even when the wizard had been revealed as this hashtag random behind a curtain, he continues to maintain the illusion. Do you remember? He started to, when it was found out, when Toto pulled that curtain back, he shouted over the loudspeaker, quote, "Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain," end of quote. Now, of course, that curtain has become a metaphor in life to suspend belief, to trust, to invest power in the mediocre. But this phrase has always also become a trope, and yes, it has become a meme, with a shout out to my late great PhD student, Dr. Mick Winter, who in his thesis on memes did a whole chapter on this, and I'll reference Mick's thesis at the end of this post. Thinking of you, brother. So this phrase has also been used to understand Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, and also understand what's happening in the online environment with big data companies. So Wayne Lonstein from Forbes stated, quote, "Today, the curtain consists of code, algorithms, artificial intelligence, and a general lack of deep understanding about how technology works on the basis of the public," end of quote. So what we've got here is a lack of transparency in higher education, in our political institutions, in our corporations, you name it, and everything about the bizarreness, the lies of our time is captured in this phrase. It's also, of course, gained a new trajectory through social media, particularly influencer culture. Doug, I'm back there again. Hi, Doug. So what is an influencer? Well, this is a person who is summoning the notion that they're real, that they're authentic, that they're just like the rest of us, but actually they are accepting money to sell goods, to influence us. So they are advertising without actually calling it advertising. So social media has activated, as we know, new modes of communication, new modes of connection, because it is hyper disintermediated. It is a flat model of communication, and it involves sharing time and sharing content. But there are consequences of this flat model. What happens is we've got a new mode of influence and a new mode of persuasion. So seemingly ordinary people without any talent at all gain influence by filming themselves putting on magnetic lashes or applying contour powder. Now I want to log the great research from Jose Alvarez Monzilachu, remarkable scholar, and this book has just been published. In fact, the publication date on the book is dated 2023. And this great edited collection is titled The Dynamics of Influencer Marketing. Wow, this is a good book. So the researchers in this edited collection show the consequences of living in a time of influencers, of opinion shapers, rather than experts who explore their expertise through evidence-based argument. Now, I talked something about this area about 15 years ago, I wrote an article called The Google Effect, and I argued what was happening was a flattening of all information. So that means you put in a Google search and a blog is just as likely to be returned to you as a singly authored scholarly monograph, right? So obviously the monograph's gone through a lot more checking and verification, but in the Google search engine, they're configured as equal in return to a search. So I called this a flattening of information. Now, what happens is in this flattening is digitally enabled users or peers are able to move horizontally through this information without being challenged too much. But what's happened in the last 5 years through this flattened culture is re-intermediation, so that is a creation of height of information, re-intermediation through influencers, right? So what happens is we can find any information, but now an influencer pops up and says, oh, that bit of information is tremendous, or that product is tremendous, and they're selling it to us. And that's become the new way that we determine quality information. Wow. So this is what Prince Charco Johnson and Christian Sandstrom described as, and hang on to yourself, quote, pandemic narcissism and aspirational labour. End of quote. Brilliant. So this is follower culture, and that's cool, but it's follower culture where the followers are used to make money. This is not about quality culture or quality information. This is not even about collaboration or friendship. This is a culture of misinformation that renders the banal, the marginal, suddenly significant and important and edgy. Now, as we all know, human beings are social creatures. We require, for our health, for our well-being, connections with others. The problem is those connections with others are organised by power. Power is the social grammar for our communities. And what happens in what's now called the platform market economy, a phrase I like a lot, platform market economy, is there's a dangerous slippage between brand image and brand reality. So we are living through a really radical transformation in the relationship between authenticity, trust, and influence. Now, influencers encourage homophily. That is, they attract to that which is similar, just like them. And this has profound consequences for our culture that we've lived through in the last 6 years. Xenophobia, racism, transphobia, sexism, name it, fear of that which is not us. So the influencers build the ties and the relationships with people that are similar to them. So this is a confusion of marketing and authenticity. So this means we all lose trust. We lose the ability to say that that human is reliable. Okay, so Instagram is the archetype of this problem, founded in 2010 and bought by Facebook in 2012. It began life as, and we forget this, a photo sharing site. And of course, the key bit of Instagram was it allowed filters to appear in those photographs. Okay, so this meant it enabled disintermediation, peer-to-peer language and communication, which is great, but then re-intermediation emerged through influences. Now, influence is not truth. Influence is not based on rigour or research or evidence. Instead, the line between public and private lives have been blurred, and meritocracy has been replaced with uniqueness. Influencers are advertisers. They are lying to us. They are pretending to be just like us. They are using authenticity to pretend that they're not selling us a product when they are. Now, there is a reason for that lie, because when this overt advertising is recognised, so in other words, they get the line wrong, we go, you're selling us stuff, then they're less likely to enact what's called EWOM, electronic word of mouth. So as you can see, authenticity in our times has become a marketing device. So it is clear now how this bizarre ecosystem is starting to work in our universities when social media meets supervision. What the pandemic showed is the consequences of too much information and not enough information literacy. Too many damn wizards behind a curtain who never had their ideas or their research checked or verified. So this is basically the spreading of rubbish online, destabilising the relationship between expertise and believability. And how dangerous is that? So let's think about, and this has been deep work for me this week, let's think about how academics convince other people about our expertise, right? Titles, publications, citations, and funding. They're our four most common metrics, right? But so many of these metrics have now been critiqued. So let's look at the best title of all, Vice Chancellor. How many Vice Chancellors have been sacked because how they've discredited themselves, their university and the field? Let's look at the cases of research misconduct. Being an author on an article doesn't actually mean anything, doesn't mean you had a role in the creation of that research. And of course, citations are strongly critiqued because journal databases like Scopus simply don't include most journals in the humanities and the social sciences. So over half of the university has over half of their journals that are not even listed in Scopus. So how could that even be real or beneficial or important or believable? And of course, funding. Particular scholars who work in particular industries deliver results to those industries and they get funded. So as you can see, with so many proxies for academic excellence being discredited, seriously, how do we know who to believe? In academic life anymore, what is credibility? What is important? What is expertise? What is intelligence? How do we know? What are our proxies? So while social media has enabled a whole new array of wizards who are small people, they're pretenders, Jean Baudrillard really predicted this situation in 1981 with Simulacra and Simulation. This great book opens with a quote from Ecclesiastes that is fake, and much to my amusement, a whole series of generations of scholars have cited this fake quote as real. So the quote from Ecclesiastes, Baudrillard, provides the basis for the model of why we are here, to be frank. Quote, "The simulacrum is never that which hides the truth. It is the truth that hides the fact that there is none. The simulacrum is true." End of quote. He confirmed, Baudrillard confirmed, that, quote, "something has disappeared." End of quote. The simulacrum is not an illusion, a mask, or a disguise. The simulacrum is a loss of the real. Put another way for Baudrillard, and I'll reference articles on this so you can see this argument, but in Baudrillard's universe, there are three layers in our world: the real, the representation, and the simulacrum. Okay, and this means that every action, every event that is real is not only immediately represented through the media, but is immediately then re-represented through the media, right? So that means information, content, real stuff is disconnected from its context and then becomes a representation and temporarily hooks into something and then unhooks itself and keeps traveling. So the consequences of this decontextualization of fact, of reality, is that influences and consumerism becomes a proxy for the real. The news is not real, it is a representation of the real. So what is happening, colleagues, is most of us are spending most of our time on the simulacrum. We are living in the representation of the representation. So life is real. real. But Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, to name a few, including this video series, confirm that most of us, most of the time, are living through other people's representations. So this Badrillian model does not stop at this point, because what happens is the re-representations appeal to other re-representations to pretend that they're fact, to pretend that they're real. Because if it's on Twitter, it must be true. So what happens is these representations talk amongst themselves and they disconnect further from any notion of the real. So what happens is, remember, real, representation, simulacrum. The simulacrum cascades, and the simulacrum becomes the basis of the next cycles of the real. So as you can see, we've got a vertical tumbling of real, representation and simulacrum, and this tumbling occurs at great speed. So for our wizard, our supervisor behind the curtain, they use this cascading real, representation, simulacrum because it allows them to escape verification, because there is no Toto to pull back that curtain. They are never found out. And the intensity of their lies, their authenticity building behaviours increase, they cascade. And if, and let's hope when, the fall happens, and we've seen some catastrophic falls in the last few years, then all those imagined verifications and authenticities are cut away, and they reveal a small, insignificant supervisor behind the curtain. So as you can see, the wizard supervisor has increased in profile and number in the last 20 years through the arbitrary application of frequently inelegant metrics. The xenophobia around the world, creating all these outsiders, has also then created this tight, homogenizing community, inward insularity, but also the failures of our universities. We currently are led, there are vice-chancellors that do not have a PhD. Now think about that, it keeps me awake at night. We wouldn't hire a junior lecturer without a PhD. We have vice-chancellors without a PhD. How do they even know the academic standards that they're meant to be maintaining? Wow. Now I know this is a really depressing post this week. I'm very depressed. This is a depressing post this week. I know I'm being real and I know I'm being tough because I'm trying to cut through the illusions and the lies and the pretensions. So how can we manage this wizard? How can we, like Toto, pull back that curtain? How do we bring back expertise in an influencer culture? Here are the 5 strategies. For the last time, let's do strategy 1. Here we go. Add a co-supervisor that is not a wizard. Now, obviously, every single pernicious PhD supervisor we've talked about, the problem can be fixed by putting in a new supervisor, and I know that, and I've talked with wonderful students through this process. But the reason I haven't suggested that is because of the final truth I'm going to tell you now. Through the routinization of restructures, so endless restructures in our universities, there are now fewer and fewer and fewer academics who can act as supervisors, okay? So it is a shrinking pool because experienced academics, experienced supervisors are being sacked, are being restructured out of the organisation. So the notion of, I'll just find myself another supervisor, well, those days are over. But the reason I'm going strongly to get yourself another supervisor with the wizard situation is you've got to add a decent, ethical, credentialed, intelligent co-supervisor. And you know what? I'd go for a really, really, really experienced academic if you can. Someone who really has that old school credibility and excellence behind them. And most importantly, find somebody who doesn't need you to build their career, because they've already got a career. Now, the greatest trauma, and I've seen it so often, is when you get lots of wizard supervisors together. And when you get all the wizards together, you never know what's real, you never know what's appropriate, and indeed, you're not getting any of the research training you require to actually pass your PhD. So therefore, it's crucial that you add a hard-working, decent person to the team, because they'll be able to do the hard work you're going to need to get that thesis through. You can trust them, because the problem with the wizard is their students attrit. So the students leave the program because they can't get them to standard. The decent supervisor provides the reality check to the panel. So they're the truth teller amongst the lies. So if research misconduct or weird stuff starts to emerge, these very senior colleagues will call out that behaviour every time, because they have a thing called ethics. Find somebody who doesn't need you to build their career. They're supervising you simply because it is the right thing to do. Their behaviour will not only reveal the supervisor behind the curtain, but they'll call out the poor behaviour. So find yourself an older, wizened, experienced supervisor who's also not frightened, not intimidated. They can occupy space and pull that curtain back. 2, internationalise yourself and fact check your supervisor's research expertise. So for this one, we're talking about their research expertise. Now, this year has been a really bad year for this. This one I'm a bit fired up about it. I've seen on so many occasions this year supervisors who have absolutely no idea what they're doing. And can I say, this is including in very elite universities as well. So students are hiding behind a title, they might be hiding behind a posh institution, but when we look at their qualifications, when we read their publications, the standard is unbelievably low. And of course, what all of this means for students is they are not offering students correct advice with regard to research. So the student thinks they're doing well. They're not doing well. So they attrit or they fail. So use all the digitised metrics and information at your disposal. Live on Google Scholar. Check up-to-date references and actually click into those references. Have a look. I was checking somebody's citations this week actually, going, oh well, there we go. They've got a new article, so maybe they're pulling themselves out. So I clicked the new Google Scholar link for this particular scholar, and what came up was one paragraph co-authored with their student that was the abstract for a seminar they did for a minor local conference. Okay, so go in there and have a look. Oh, there's a thing. Click in the thing, and like me this week with another wizard I was checking, it was one paragraph that was co-written with their student. So don't be satisfied sitting in an institutional bubble, assuming that the standards in your department or your faculty or your university or your city are remotely generalisable. I need you to internationalise yourself. I need you to empower yourself. Get evidence that demonstrates that your prospective or actual supervisor knows what they are doing in a research field or discipline. And can I say, I'm doing a big international research project on this at the moment. Be wary of researchers that have not rendered their Google Scholar profile public. Now, we all know when Google Scholar was released way over a decade ago, that different disciplines have different H indices, right? So, at the start it was like engineers would be going to everybody else, well, my goodness me, your H index is low. Now we have that subtlety, we have the information literacy, so biology is going to have a different H index to English, and we're cool with that. Physics is going to have a different H index to history, and we're cool. But if a researcher has decided not to render their Google Scholar profile public, you have to have a think about that, because we are all reliant on supervisors knowing their research area, knowing methodology and reading widely and comprehensively to understand their field and where it's going. And that's why you're relying on all of us as supervisors to put ourselves through peer review frequently. This includes me. I write articles, write books, but part of what I'm doing is I'm proving to students, I might have this career and stuff, but actually the career doesn't matter. How am I going now? How am I going now? And I put myself forward for peer review multiple times a year so that my expertise continues to be tested and students see that. So therefore, look deeply into the research career, and if information about their research career has been masked from the public, have a good think about that. So you may have yourself a wizard. You may have yourself a supervisor behind a curtain. So don't muck about with a supervisor that does not know their research field. Wow, this never ends well. Okay, these are the students that don't make it or fail through the examination process. They think they're doing well, they submit their thesis, and they get the shock of their lives. Okay, so find a solid, verified researcher. Remember that a PhD is about international standards, not a wizard behind some minor local curtain. 3, recognize that wizards are manipulators. So fact check your supervisor's expertise in supervision. So use information to pull back the curtain. Now, this is important. An academic, particularly in some fields in medicine and health, a person can be a great researcher and a really dreadful supervisor. Okay, so they can be great, you can do my last thing, oh, great researcher, fantastic. But they can also be a dreadful supervisor. They can have a career of failed supervisions of students that attrit the programs. Now, the problem you've got, the problem we all have, is failures in the doctoral space are not really recorded anywhere. They're not recorded on somebody's CV when somebody leaves, and they're not recorded on the institutional profile in a public way. Because when a student leaves, it's shameful, and it should be. It's shameful, so it's not publicised. So there are plenty of outstanding researchers in certain fields who have built their research career on the basis of unpaid or underpaid research assistants or students that are with them for a particular time. So the previous strategy focused on research expertise, and that's crucial. This strategy focuses on expertise and supervision, and they are different. Supervision is about expertise and authenticity. Now, almost every platform that exists around us at the moment is discrediting expertise and authenticity. Most students are mushrooms, you are kept in the dark, and you are fed excrement. Do not be in their number. Ask what training your supervisor has completed, not 10 years ago, this year. You have a right to know that they are accredited supervisors. Now, you may hear me, because I publicise the training I do for supervisors, but you may hear me when I'm training supervisors around the world, that I argue that the single skill a supervisor must know, the most important skill, is they need to read a thesis, and upon reading a thesis say, that is a minor correction, so that can go through examiners and it will pass. And that thesis is not there yet. That thesis is below the line. That would have to be restructured. And they need to do that by reading a thesis. That one is here. That one is here. That is the skill of supervision. You must know the standards. And as I said, this has been a dreadful year where supervisors have supposedly verified the standard of a thesis and they've got it wrong time and time again. I get quite emotional. Can you think about being the student where you think you've done well? You think that this thesis is of quality, and then it goes through international examiners and they go, this is terrible. This is terrible. So students need to verify their supervisor's expertise and ability so that we can trust what they're saying. Experience is not enough because it can be a bad experience. Instead, see and verify their professional development record. Have they remained learners all their life? LinkedIn is great for that information. Have they done some LinkedIn stuff? Look everywhere. See what's available. Are they brittle wizards? that don't have accountability for any of their actions. So check the supervisor's record of completion, not enrolments, completions, the speed of those completions, and the diversity of the students that have completed. Check that they remain humble and they understand that supervision requires professional development. Now, if you find none of these characteristics at all, then it's time to add a proper accountable supervisor to your panel, or remove the wizard, because they will hurt you. They will hurt you. The wizard is incredibly dangerous to your career, perhaps one of the most dangerous we've talked about in this whole series, because the wizard is the supervisor where the students don't finish, where the students are trit, or the students have incredibly poor results. The wizards do not know how to complete students to standard, full stop. They may seem charming, they may seem persuasive, but they are manipulative and they are conceited. And they brag about accomplishments that are not theirs, to brag about. So avoid arguing, avoid the power struggles, establish rules and clear expectations of your behaviour and their behaviour, and most importantly, hide your private thoughts and feelings. Protect your big ideas until you finish the thesis. These people are energy vampires, so learn how to say no, choose your battles carefully, and make yourself unavailable often. 4. Believe in yourself and work on your professional development to enhance your skills. So the last two strategies have been about you claiming back your power. And I'll tell you why. Often when something goes wrong in supervision, it actually is not the student's fault. It may be, but often it's not the student's fault. So empower yourself with the information that you require to make good decisions. But this 4th strategy is completely about you. Remember Dorothy. Dorothy had the power the entire time to return home. Dorothy didn't need the wizard. She could click her red heels 3 times and return home. But the whole point of Oz is to create this alternative world. It was a way to deny Dorothy's power, that supposedly she needed an empowered wizard to get her home, or the Scarecrow Brain, Tin Man Heart, the legendary lion Courage. Now, of course, all 4 of them possessed all those attributes and skills the entire time. So don't displace your power, your ability, your hopes, your needs, your future to your supervisor. Dorothy, the power is within you today. Remember, the wizard supervisor is working every single day so that you doubt yourself, you're disempowered, you question your ability. So that places all the pressure and the insecurity on you so that you don't look up, you don't go to Google Scholar, you don't reveal that the wizard is just some hashtag random behind a curtain. You can do this, come on! You are brilliant. I need you to commit. I need you to respect yourself. I need you to get on with it. Be outward. Continue to learn. And that is what the wonderful Margaret Morrison has shown is the best way to avoid and challenge deception and trickery. You have choices, and the wizard wants you to believe that you don't have any choices. You have choices, you have alternatives, you have agency. So let's get you organised for the next stage of your life. As the legendary Scott Allen has talked about, I love this. Confidence is a choice. And it is a choice that we perform every single day by taking small steps. So set realistic goals, banish, wipe away that sense of unworthiness, and remember that great old Italian proverb, quote, "When the game is over, the king and the pawn go back into the same box. End of quote. Remember, whoever you are, whatever your title, we all end up in the same place. 5. Here we go. Know that the wizard will attempt to rip you off in your publishing. Do not believe their promises. Okay, this is the hard one. The wizard is dangerous because they're not very good. They are mediocre academics in tough times, and they are paranoid that they're going to be found out. So they are dangerous. And if I can shift metaphors right at the end of the post this week, let's talk about the wizard's curtain. PhD students are actually the wizard's curtain. They are the confirmation that the wizard has ability. You are the proxy, an inelegant one. You are a proxy that they are decent, ethical human beings. Remember that line from the film, no one gets to see the wizard. The PhD students, you, provide that curtain of credibility, so no one gets to see what's actually going on. You give them authenticity, so you must protect yourself. Build teams of colleagues, friends, professional development. Get out of that institution as much as you can. And yes, watch your publishing. Get the code of conduct in place, do the best you can. But can I state in a very depressing mode at the end of this post, there may not be much you can do about publishing in the case of a wizard. They will be bitter and twisted, and they will get on the ground and they will wrestle you for a role on those publications. But always remember your value. The wizard needs you. You are their curtain. Even when they discredit and shout and blame and demean, don't forget your power. And know that in this circumstance, if you can, you're going to have to get through this doctorate as quickly as possible and get the rights back on your research and authorship as quickly as you can. Now, it was Wilbeth Sanchez who confirmed that managing a wizard is draining, physically and mentally. You've got to be assertive, not aggressive, maintain eye contact, don't take the bait, don't get emotional, you can't out-argue them, don't argue with them, don't enable their behaviour, don't let them steamroll you, don't let them talk over you, don't let them interrupt you, and do not let them dominate the conversation. Use silence. So, as we've talked about throughout my entire professional life, to be frank, policies exist to empower the disempowered. So use the policies. Know every day in higher education that this weird institution, nothing is as it appears. Know your self-worth and do not let anybody take that off you. C.K. Murray stated that, quote, life exists as much in our head as outside of it, end of quote. The wizard is a lesson for us all, lesson for me every single day, to not fall into sort of the false promises of security. Those days are over. To not fall for lies and deceit. But most importantly, I think the wizard teaches us a crucial lesson. We must never value ourselves via the approval of others. The wizard cannot complete the PhD student. The attrition rates are too high because the wizard does not know what they are doing. The wizard needs the student to feel like they're lacking something. Now, the great and confident students, often the older students, call out this behaviour because they know that the wizard is a pretender. The wizard in the film, of course, comes clean in the end. The wizards in our universities are promoted. They work their entire career behind the curtain, terrified that one day they may be found out. And occasionally, with a lot of publicity, they are. We can make a decision at the conclusion of this series to stand for something, to stand for reading, for thinking, for writing, to stand for integrity and stand for kindness, stand for evidence, stand for accountability, stand for citizenship, and yes, stand for learning. And when we do, we realise, like Dorothy, that we've held the power all the time. Thank you so much for being a part of this bizarre but wonderful Pernicious PhD Supervisor series. We've had some pretty tough conversations. I've done some of the most intricate and challenging research of my life. But I hope at the end of all of this disturbing research, we know who we are and we know what we stand for. And what I would say to you is our broken universities can be rebuilt. They can be revisioned. And that revisioning starts with care and respect for our doctoral students and indeed all students. So next week through to Christmas, we're going to do something incredibly positive. After this dark, disturbing time, we're now going to look at some of the greatest scholars, the greatest people, and the greatest ideas that can enable us to revision higher education and revision learning. Let's start this next stage of the post. I wish you love, light, and peace. Tea out.